What a crowd today. What a handsome and lovely crowd. This is going to be a humdinger. Well, let's get this show on the road. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to join us for today's Growing the Future workshop. Engineer your revenue floor before seeding. Spring is getting close. I'm sure we can all feel it starting to shift. The days are getting a little bit longer and the yard is starting to wake up, and decisions are being quietly stacked up at the kitchen table. And some of those decisions are around agronomy. Some of them are operational, but some of them you open up your eyeballs in the morning and go, oh, it's the financials. It's the financial questions. What are my margins this year? Where's my break even? If things don't go quite the way the spreadsheets hope that I hope they will, what does that look like for pressure in the business? What can we absorb? That is the conversation we're going to have today, and I'm really excited to have some amazing people here with me to help slice and dice that. Firstly, we have Dave Sullivan, Sully from Global Agri Solution. Dave works with farm financials across Western Canada, and he spends a lot of time digging into the numbers, and he's going to Jedi Ninja that up today. Good morning, David.
Morning, Dan. How you doing?
I'm doing amazing. Yeah, really excited for this. 132 folks on the call. Oh, we are grateful. Thank you for coming. This is your event to make the most of. Also joining us is Dean Klippenstine from MNP, who works closely with farms across the prairies on financial structuring and business management. A bit of a legend, let's be real. Bit of a legend. Good morning, Dean.
How are we doing this morning, Daniel?
I'm doing really good. Dean was looking for his Scotch virtual background this morning, but he couldn't quite dig it up. So he's got to have.
I was missing my former actual Scotch background.
Well, all the awards on your wall look great too. Just awards for being a great guy. So we're gonna get his angle, and then Jake. Last but not least, Jake Leguee from Leguee Farms, just to add some farm context here about how he's seeing things. Thanks so much for joining us, Jake.
Happy to be here, Dan. Thanks for the invitation. And yeah, I got my virtual background set to summertime here, so looking forward to some flowering crops again.
You're getting everybody looking out the window, man. Stop it. No, it's good. So just a little bit of housekeeping. This session is being recorded. If you'd like to go back and watch it later, we will share it with you. No charge for that. Share it with somebody else that could use this information. We also want this to be incredibly interactive. Put a thumbs up in the chat or let us know what you'd most like to know. I think we're going to have a lot of questions today. I really do. So you can put that into the chat. You can put it into the Q&A, and I will work hard to get to any and all questions, even if we have to go a little bit longer. And I usually get to everybody, but I did ignore Dean on a webinar the other day. So maybe he'll fill us into what his brilliant question was on Ted Cockwell's webinar. But before I hand things over, I just want to set the stage, and Dave's going to give us a little bit more context. But across the prairies right now, when you're looking at the farm budgets going into this year, the story keeps coming back. It's pretty consistent. The margins are tight, and depending on the crop mix in the region, a lot of projections would suggest farms would be somewhere in the range of $25 to $50 per acre below break even. If we see average, I think that's an important word, is average. How do we be above average? That's why we're here today. Some folks are going to outperform that, and that's measurable. And those farms are doing certain things that lead to success, like Jake. We were talking about how Jake is in that top 25 percentile of knowing where he's at situationally. So that's really what we want to focus on today. And the markets have been moving around quite a bit. We've seen a rally in the grain charts recently, but we've also got a war in a place that's the third largest urea producer on the planet. So a lot of stuff on the move, and we want to untangle that and find out, where is your revenue floor? Where's your break even? At what point do prices, yields, and costs start to put real pressure on your business? That's the purpose of today's session. And Dave's going to be physically walking us through a spreadsheet. And I want to encourage, again, questions and comments all the way through. And with that, Dave, you can give us a little bit of where we're at situationally, and then we'll get Jake to kind of give his response to that. And then Dean will give us the spice as usual. So with that, David, take it away a little bit. Give us some context of what you're seeing out there. You always have a good pulse, finger on the pulse of what's going on.
Yeah, and I guess we get the luxury of seeing couple thousand farms a year, and we get 10 years of their financial statements as part of our underwriting for 2026. And then we look at their crop plan and their budget for 2026 and forecast that out for the year. That's how we approach our underwriting. The benefit of that is that, you know, we get to see a broad brush of different financial scenarios, but some themes start to evolve as you look at, you know, more and more of them, and you start to separate them into different regions. The trends start to become apparent. But I think it is important to sort of back the bus up a little bit and frame it and get some context. So, Dan, when you invited me to come on, it was a chance to stand on my soapbox and sort of pontificate about why we need to do it a certain way. And Dean being on the call is apt because Dean trained me on how we do this. But I sent out the little PDF. I guess that was yesterday. We sent that PDF that any of the attendees that were registered earlier would have received, and anybody that wants it can obviously have it. The PDF basically walks you through how to break down the farm financial statements. And once you know how to break down the farm financial statements, you can look at your farm, and then the information that I present is broken down the exact same way. And I think, you know, that's one of the tricks with this is that when, you know, you come on different webinars and podcasts and government publications and different consultants and different accounting firms, everybody does it differently. And I believe that doesn't serve the industry very well at all. Actually, it means that we don't have a common vernacular. And yes, there are benefits of different ways of producing financial statements and looking at your numbers. But in my experience, this is sort of the 1.0 version of doing that every farm can do themselves. It's accessible, which makes it much more, you know, we'll say everyone can do it, and you can compare every farm against every other farm because you've done a common theme throughout. I'll share my screen just to make
yeah, hopefully you've got permissions there if you allow. We'll allow it this one time, David.
I have control. That's a scary thought.
Good morning, Brett Jensen. Dave, are you most guys doing accrual now versus cash?
Yeah, I'd say our customer base, 95% are accrual as a function of tax more than anything. But the accrual financials is the frame to set this up. You can do it with cash. It just means you get a lot of messy results when you do it that way. If you're doing it with cash, I would take it an average of several years to try and smooth it out a little bit. I also believe that's a smart way to do it with cash or with accrual, pardon me, as well. You need to look at things, the trends over time, because a single year of information is not good enough. And so in that statement that I sent you guys, it really comes down to breaking the farm down. The first step is getting your revenue right. So just the grain revenue, everything that has to do with grain is revenue. Everything that is not grain is, you know, livestock or other income. Kick it out, because if we're trying to compare grain farms versus other grain farms, you need to know how your operation is running. Compare yourself against your past results. If you frame it up as all the grain revenue is your grain revenue, everything else is kicked out into livestock and other revenue, and then minus seed, fertilizer, and chemical. And we call those inputs. Some people call them variable costs, and we can debate this. We have what we call variable costs and fixed costs. I don't like those names because all costs are variable depending on how the year goes. But if we call it inputs, are those inputs that if you put another dollar of inputs into your fields, you would expect a positive ROI. If you didn't see a positive ROI, you wouldn't be putting those inputs into the field. And it requires no allocation, because you can actually look at it on a per acre basis or on a per field basis or a per crop basis, and you can get it exactly right. You don't need to do any math to divide out, you know, it's like your fuel bill. How much fuel was spent on your durum versus your canola? It requires an allocation. The extra work isn't going to teach you much because the differences are going to be so small, so we don't bother doing it. So we just lump all the grain revenue minus seed, fert, and chem equals gross margin. And that becomes the most important number on the farm. If you can understand your gross margins crop by crop and for your whole farm, you are head and shoulders above the average guy, because you can see a lot. It's basically traps everything about your production, your marketing, how much you're putting on for inputs, how well you're buying your inputs, and we can glean a lot of information about gross margin. If we can just get that right, that's a huge step. Dean, you trained me on this. This is sort of, your opportunity of like understanding. You see, over your 30-year career, what this means to farms. And when we're working with businesses, good gross margin can cover up a lot of sins. A bad gross margin can make a great farm that's, controlling its costs. Can't get ahead, can't get a win.
Well, and remember, when we were talking, when Dave and I started and worked together on this analysis, which we cheated off of, we didn't develop it ourselves, we just gravitated to it. It was not for the sake of for the government or for tax or for insurance companies. It was for us to assess and make improvements on our farms. I mean, that's the power of it. And we've got our cutting edge folks we know in the industry and clients and friends who are now, I yell at them when they tell me gross margin per crop, because that's 10 years ago, that's 20 years ago. We need to now know gross margin by field, right? Because not every one of Jake's fields are the same. And so for your own benefit, for those cutting edge producers who understand all the stuff Dave was talking about as far as gross margin, labor, power, machinery, land building, and finance, I want you to take it. The challenge here is take it to the next step and do that by field. You'll be shocked at the differential of gross margin and profitability by field. And obviously, you're not going to make decisions on a single year, but in the long run, it's remarkable, because the difference on 2.5 bushel an acre is not a 5% increase in yield or decrease in yield is not a 5% increase or decrease in profitability. It's sometimes 100% of our profitability, because we're in a commodity business, folks. Like it or not, we're a price taker world, and 5% incremental difference is enormous. So everyone should be doing accrual, gross margin by farm, by crop, and now by field. It's fully, we have that information, the technology.
And then Dean mentioned it, it's the labor, power, machinery, and land building and finance. So essentially we take all the other expenses. So we've got seed, fert, and chem in the gross margin. We take all of the other expenses. From a simplistic view, labor, power, machinery is the job. How much does it cost you to get the job done? It doesn't matter if it's fuel, repairs, maintenance, custom work, leases, all of that goes into the cost of getting the job done. And then you have the cost of being there. So it's the cost of land rent, your taxes, your lawyers, your accountants, the cost of just having a business. We separate those two costs out. If you don't separate them out, I don't care as much. It's a little bit of work to try and get it right. In the end, it's total fixed costs. It's all of the other expenses. In a perfect world, we split them out and we do it exactly the same every year, and we can control and see how things are rolling. But if you can't, because your financial statements are too jumbled, it's okay to have everything else in one column, because we talk about it often as total fixed costs. And then
Jake, Jake, did you want to jump in on this? And I'm curious how many farms are on this vernacular, so to speak. But and there are other perspectives. What are you doing out there, Jake?
Yeah, I mean, we've been using that style of reporting our finances for quite a few years now, since we went to MNP quite a few years ago, and it is nice to separate them out into those pieces, because you can see how they're changing, and they have been changing. I mean, all three of them have escalated quite dramatically over the past 5-6 years. I like the gross margin per field that Dean was talking about, but I think you have to add one more piece to that, and that's how are you paying for that land? If it's a piece that you bought 20 years ago and it's paid for, you can kind of put up with some not as good production numbers out of that piece as compared with one that you're renting or one that you bought 2 years ago. Because the profitability on that field is quite a bit higher. I mean, Dean, you might disagree, but there is something to be said for legacy land that Dad bought a long time ago that, yeah, it may not be the prime piece, but the profitability on it is quite good because it's paid for. So,
Well,
just another.
yeah, no, for sure we have more flexibility with land that we don't own, Jake. But what'll happen is that ignoring the capital cost of how that land comes into your farm, whether you rent it, whether you're paying the banks to buy it, or you've owned it for a long time, it does help you refine the development of, if I was going to pursue land aggressively, whether it's renting or buying stuff that's 10% more, I get 10% more yield. That will help us guide that in the future. Yeah, it's not for short-term stuff. So I agree.
Really affects your cap rate, I guess, where you bought land at and how long you've been buying land and for what. Yeah, we had just a little bit of housekeeping here. That file did go out last night in the email. It's at the bottom of the email, and I did put it in the chat. It sounded like we were getting it, and I don't know if you wanted to put it up, David, and just run through it quick. It's a beautiful document. You also had some spreadsheets, but we had a question from Tarek Wilderman. Going into the year, what's the best way to come up with yield and price? Some people use bottom line with crop insurance yields and price for 2026, or would it be best to use a 5-year average?
In my starting point is always the crop insurance numbers, just because they're a long-term average and it removes some of your bias. And then my preference is to use 10-year average for yields. And then I also prepare a budget based on my, I would say, expected prices, not my hopeful wish list prices, but my expected prices. Those sort of frame my analysis. And then we've always got the upside budget. So it's the target prices and the target yields that we're going for. That's how I approach it. I don't know, Dean and Jake, you might have a different take on it.
I have an issue with crop insurance yielding, how they set up their averages, because yeah, it works good on the big crops that you've grown for a very long time.
True.
That are commonly grown in the area, but the specialty crops, it does a really bad job. A few of our specialty crops that we grow on our farm, our crop insurance yield is quite a bit below our actual yield, because crop insurance yield isn't really your average, it's how you compare to the area. So they'll apply a multiplier to the area average yield, but that might not be where you're actually at. So that's what I found. To trigger a claim on lentils, we've got to be something like 65% of our actual, long-term yield before we start triggering a claim at 80% coverage, just because of where that crop insurance yield factors in. So I think it's worth looking at both, because you're just missing something important with those crop insurance yields.
Yeah, it's a good
Jake,
point.
when you look at your,
going to have a massive error or gap between your actual yields and your crop insurance coverage. I wouldn't say that would be in general. I would say that would be kind of edge cases. So you're kind of falling into one of those edge cases, but you need to know that, and looking at your yields versus those crop insurance yields kind of gives you that relevant. Is it relevant or not? For most farms, I'd say it is pretty relevant, but there are lots out there that it is not representative of their operation for sure.
Before we get into this, build your own per acre income statement and the spreadsheets and stuff like that, the workshopy stuff, I am genuinely curious, and I'm sure lots of people on the call might appreciate what you could share, Jake, about where you're at with your planning, your budget, your outlook, what you're worried about this year, or what keeps you up at night, or what you're happy about. It's possible too.
Yeah, I mean, for me, when I'm trying to decide on where to go with insurance, and this is that time of the year when we get all of our quotes from everybody, right? I guess I'm looking at two different things. One of them is cash flow. Like, if we end up in an insurance claim, how do we cash flow ourselves until next harvest, right? How do we get through that 12 months when we're in a claim position? And then the second piece is catastrophic loss. So what's the realistic worst case scenario? I mean, you could always say that there's zero yield, and some parts of the prairies have seen something close to that. But you kind of got to look at that within your area. what's the realistic worst case scenario, and can we afford to be in that scenario this upcoming year with the suite of insurance products that we picked. On our farm, I think that profitability is quite elusive heading into 2026. It's looking like if we can get through this year without going backwards, I think we'll be pretty happy, but I've seen budgets that look like this a lot of times in the past, and a lot of things can change between now and harvest for good or bad. So there's no reason to write things off just yet. But making this decision and getting it right is one of the most important decisions that we make every year. And I guess for me, I'm probably going to be looking at a combination of different products to try to cover off what I think our risks are, both private and government.
Thank you for that perspective. That's good. Go ahead, Dean.
I'd like to jump on what Jake said there, and he summarized it perfectly. Is we can't write the crop off now. For all the great top tier producers that are out here listening to this podcast, or what are we, webinar or podcast? I don't even know.
It's actually a live online interactive forum.
Okay, good. Well, you had more lingo.
Words. I'm in the business, but I literally hate podcasts and webinars. It just sounds horrible. But yeah, we're live online with a bunch of people on the internet right now, Dean.
A bunch of smart folks who have an hour to waste in their morning. But Jake nailed it, you guys. That if you don't remember anything else from what the talking heads are going to talk about for the rest of this thing, is do not write this crop off before you go into the field. Because you tell me there's a person smart enough to predict all the variables that can happen in the world between now and then. Obviously, you would have predicted the Iranian attacks in the U.S., right? Like, there's no way. And so there is no correlation between what the facts are on the boots on the ground today and what they're going to be after next year's harvest, right? If someone would have said, Dean, bet both your children that our average lentil yields in the Regina Plains were going to be what they were this year, I'd had to tell my wife, we're down 2 kids, honey. Bad news. Like, we would have never predicted that. And so I love what Jake said there. And getting this insurance debate right is really getting comfort so you can put it behind you and go execute to the top of your ability. I've preached that for 30 years, and it's true today that if you beat by executing at the top of your game by 5 bushel or 3 bushel or 4 bushel, that's life altering. Jake's a young guy. He's got lots of career left in him. If he outproduces his best producers in his area by 4 bushel by just executing that last little 2% tweaks, you do that over a lifetime. That's enormous, the long-term impact. So great statement, Jake. Thanks very much.
And Jake, you said that you cannot chase markets. It's fatal. You've learned that. You're a young guy, but you've been farming long enough to know that.
Yeah, I've tried to pick the winners before during the winter, and I've always found that even if I end up getting the marketing part of that call right, then the weather interferes, and I would have been better off just sticking with my usual mix. So that's kind of what I've landed on here. It's for us in our area, I find it's best to just stick with the plan and try not to move things around too much.
Stick with fantasy football. Okay, David, we want to, you're going to educate us.
Yeah, we can jump in. It's one question there I see from Brent. And
okay.
Says, when is your SCIC yield not your own average? That's just when you're growing a crop that you haven't grown before or don't have very much data in crop insurance. So you end up having to use the RM average or the area average, provincial average, depending on where the data is coming from in the mix with your historical data. And then the number will be different than what you can probably produce. If, I think in Jake's case, if you're better than your area average on growing most of your crops, they don't give you any credit for that. So, when you don't have a lot of data, the yield for, say, lentils might come in and say that your 100% is 25 bushels per acre, but on your farm, with your experience, your agronomy, your land, you can achieve 30 bushels per acre on average. Well, that's what we're talking about, is that gap between crop insurance is 100% and your own, your land, your agronomy better than the crop insurance does.
I've got another question here in the Q&A. Thank you. But I just wanted to say to Tony, you have your hand up. So if you want to talk, we'll answer this question. I'll circle back. I just want to make sure that you were putting your hand up on purpose there. But let's, there he's gone. I thought so maybe sometimes. But with the question we have in the Q&A here from Joanne, for crops without seed yield insurance, for gross revenue, would you advise StatsCan, Canadian export values, or world trade data last 5 years?
That's a tough question.
Are we stumped with the collective IQ and experience here? And
I don't really follow the question.
for crops without seed yield insurance, for crop revenue, would you advise StatsCan, Canadian export values, or world trade data for the last 5 years? Maybe what data set are you looking at? I'm not sure, Joanne. Can you clarify?
I would generally find a proxy. So if I'm growing, a strange crop like say camelina, and there's not a ton of data. I think there's like 1,000 acres in all of Saskatchewan that's been grown, so it's not a ton of yield data. I mean, that gives you a starting point if that's available, but you have to look at your research, find comparable proxies, Montana, North Dakota, Minnesota if you're over in the east, or proxy crop. So if I'm looking at camelina, I'm probably looking at more similarly to like a mustard, like maybe a brown mustard.
Is Joanne just talking about what number she uses?
Turf seed, she said. You said in the chat, forage and turf seed. Does that clarify?
Is with regards to budgeting, is she talking about? Or
Joanne, did you want to come on the call? Joanne, can we allow you to talk, Joanne? Let's get to the bottom of this.
Might be shy.
She might be shy. It's up to you, Joanne.
And admittedly, like forage and turf seed is a bit outside of my expertise. I would say, my background in grains and oilseeds and livestock would be, where I don't want to go too far outside of that. I could probably get myself in trouble.
Okay, she said she can't get the mic to work. Okay, well, let us know if you have more context. We appreciate the questions. Again, keep the questions coming. This is great. David, I think a lot of people are interested in that worksheet you were getting.
Yeah, I'll pop it up here. Can you guys see now?
Yeah, we can see it here. Joanne said yes for budgeting group margins. So.
Yeah, and I think we've, I sort of hit on it. You got to find a relevant proxy when you don't have your own data. Find something that is relevant to your situation. It's your best estimate, though. There's really no replacing your own experience and your own knowledge of your farm.
Or the buyers, the potential buyers of the product would have a
buyers of the product, or the guy that's selling you the seed, I suppose, maybe don't want to take their word for it on the seller side, but it's certainly sometimes you have to make best estimates. That's for sure.
Okay, what do you got in the tickle trunk here, Dave?
So this is the sheet that we sent out, and really it's just a simple breakdown. It's basically what I used to work at M&P. It's how we do things at GARS. It's the simple version of take your financial statement, pull it apart, and put it back together in the same format so that it doesn't matter if you're talking to your neighbor. If you both did this, you could at least have the same starting point. As far as if we're talking gross margin, we've defined it the same. If we're talking LPM or LBF, we've defined it the same. And I think that is powerful. We see that in these power farms and these different farm groups that are talking to each other. You need to have a common set of working notes. And so this basically just breaks it down on a step-by-step approach about how to do it yourself. I don't want to, steal M&P's thunder, any other consultant out there's thunder. You can pay someone to do this work for you. But if you're, even half-assed decent with Excel, you can do this in about an hour, taking a year of financial statements and get it set up. And then I even walk through a couple of special situations about, multi-entities and crop shares and cattle, guys that feed some grain to their cows and it just disappears off the financial statements. And that really just breaks it into some quick numbers. These are the 7 numbers every farm needs to understand for their grain operation. If you understand this, you are head and shoulders above the average operation in Western Canada, because there's a lot of guys walking around that do not understand these numbers. And when we come onto a farm, the farms that understand this over and over and over perform better than the farms that don't. If they are working through a structured set of financials for their historical performance and their budget, it almost always ends up that farmer ends up being one of the top performers in the area. And the guys that are just, they got revenue at the top and, net income at the bottom, or there's how much money is in the bank account is the measure of the farm. Those farms generally underperform. And so this tool set just sets the framework up for many, many discussions. It just happens to be really important when you're talking about, your insurance options and planning for the year.
Why are they performing better if they do this?
Sorry,
Why?
cut you off there, talked over you.
Go ahead.
Well, and the last thing that I included was some breakdown of 2025. This is big, broad, geographies. So, and it's a little bit skewed. So Manitoba, most of our data is from Southwest Manitoba that last year was affected by some of the drought. So they're getting, that area didn't perform well. I don't have a ton of data from, like, say, Eastern Manitoba. The rest of the regions are small enough that I think their context is pretty easy to follow. But
does the Red River Valley need insurance?
Yeah, well, I'd say less. They need less insurance. It's certainly cheaper out there. But it shows some pain. Like, we got some areas. This is all before any crop insurance payouts, before any agri-stability payouts, and before any other farm income that farm might have. And so that all of that combined gives us sort of these breakdowns and a good starting point to compare yourself against. It would always be better to zoom in into a tighter geography. I think M&P does a great job of that, where they benchmark farms against other relevant producers in their geography. I think that's a great way to look at the world. But it's at least you have, with this tool set, you can do it yourself in the privacy of your own office, and have these sort of frame of mind in front of you, compare yourself against some benchmarks. And that's pretty obvious. You want to be, higher gross margin than your neighbors, and you want to have a lower LPM and LBF than your neighbors. And if you don't, you need to think about, well, why? And we need to think about, how do we get there? Dean, Jake, offer your,
Yeah, what's your perspective? We did have a comment here from Craig Walsh. Southern Alberta must include irrigation, dry land significantly different. And we did get a link to the website. Afton, thank you. There's a link in the chat to the website that takes you to the PDF that takes you to the golden land of being better on average than, I guess, the average. So,
and the comment about, Southern Alberta must include irrigation. There would be some irrigation data in there, but not a lot. It would be farms that are 100% irrigated. I kicked out anybody that was growing like canola seed for Bayer or BSF or whoever. I kicked all of that out. But Southern Alberta is a pretty big geography when we take everything basically south of Calgary, east of the Rockies. So very, that's a large region. So yeah, take everything with a grain of salt in that's a big swath of land to put into one bucket. You certainly would want, if I'm doing this with a farmer, I'd want to be, 50 to 100 kilometer radius would be the perfect way to do this. But obviously I can't present that here today.
I've been told I was supposed to refer to Afton as the Afton the Amazing. So I've done that. Check mark. Jake, go ahead.
I was just going to make a comment on benchmarking. We've done a couple of different benchmarking exercises over the years, and I find the most value I get from it is when I know who the other farmers are. Because there's so many factors that go into why your numbers are the way they are, especially with land building finance. A farm that's fifth generation that has most of their land paid for is obviously going to have a very different land building finance than one that's 75% rented. So, in a peer group that we're a part of through Backswath Management, we know the farms very well. So when we do our benchmarking exercises, I know that there's some benchmarks that we're going to do worse on and some that we're going to do better on, just given our size and growth trajectory over the years. So that gives me the context that I need to be able to get some good value out of those numbers. Otherwise, it can just make you feel bad if you're comparing to the wrong farms.
That's fair. Yeah. And everybody has a unique position. Chad Nicholas, you got your hand up. If you want to talk, I'll circle back to you. I just want to make sure that you're up. Oh, he's gone too.
One of the things I'd like to comment, you talked about why is it that producers who know their gross margin, labor, power, machinery, land building and finance and talk in that, is that's really just an indication that they're learning and understanding their farm better. And then taking that, if you just know this information but don't change your behavior and don't compare to how good to strive for improvements, then it wouldn't automatically make your farm better. But it's always the competitive forces and the competitive nature that if you and Dave and I owned a Jiffy Lube, and Dave was doing 8 oil changes per hour, and you were doing 9, and then I was doing 7, we would all think we're doing all that in a bag of chips. And then we'd go into our peer groups that Jake talked about, whether it's Backswath or whether it's Terry Betkers or Rob Sykes or Evans, they're all very positive. Because then Dave and I, we might not ever get to 9 oil changes that Dan is, but we'd understand that it's possible, and we'd strive to make improvements. And then Dan might learn something else from us. But that power of learning and comparing and striving for improvement in the art of the possible, that's the magic to these numbers. These numbers just let it be a simple, easy measure.
Great comments. How's your Jiffy Lube, folks? And what the old maxim, what you measure will improve. Michael Muscby's asking or commenting, we are already calculating our yields based on last fall's moisture, snow on the ground, and the nutrients used up from last year's crop yields and soil test. Is this a good strategy?
Sounds exceptional.
Michael, you're doing great. High fives.
That's a high level of agronomy to be that far ahead.
Right.
That's remarkable. Les Henry always, we were so busy congratulating ourselves on how exceptionally we were and continuous cropping and direct seeding. And we said, we're indestructible farms. And then I remember Les Henry's comment that he goes, I think we underestimate subsoil moisture and its impact on our crops long-term. So understanding all those factors, anybody who can even have that conversation is doing fabulous. So I love to see that in the industry.
Well, let us know how you're doing. What does your budget look like there, Michael? How are you feeling about this year? I'd love to know. And go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, Les Henry always said that water in the ground is money in the bank.
God bless Les Henry for sure. Good stuff. David, you're going to walk us through some more workshop-y stuff here.
Yeah, and so I'm just bringing up a spreadsheet that shows sort of the farm financial scenario. These are, just highlighting the point, and I'm not sure if there's any government or quasi-government people on the call, banks. So they need to understand this, and that. So the LPM labor pound machinery is the yellow bars, and the LBF is the blue, and then inputs is seed, fertilizer, and chemical is the orange. We go from a $250 to $550 break even between 2010 and 2016. So over that 16-year period here, we've more than doubled our break evens on our operations. We have not doubled.
You were talking about how that's just exploded on your farm, and there's virtually nothing you can do about some of those costs, like equipment and fuel and fertilizer. And
I mean, I wouldn't say there's nothing you can do. I mean, obviously the faster you upgrade your stuff, the quicker that escalates. But at the same time, we do still have to keep our machinery modern. And if we try to hold off too long, then we end up spending a bunch more on parts and supplies and repairs. So it does have a way of getting you no matter what you do.
And we look through this lens to set the stage of understand the wet years through the early 2010s, all the way till about 2018 when it started to get drier. And then we saw the commodity, the spike of commodity prices through 22 after the 2021 drought. Now, I'm not saying that farmers did need to put themselves in position to take advantage of it, but that profit was abnormal. If you look at the chart and this, every farm, has spikes from good years, bad years, from yield, but these spikes on this chart for that 2022 crop, that was a potentially generational year because we had exceptionally high commodity prices that led from the 2021 drought. And then we've seen since then this erosion of commodity prices. We end up having the largest crop in Canadian history in 2025. And barely peaks above the break even because the commodity prices just reacted in the other way because we didn't market enough grain early enough to take advantage of the commodity prices that were there, during the summer. And so we barely get a profit after growing the largest crop in Western Canadian history. That is a sentence I should not be able to say. And then in 2026, we look at this budget for the coming year and we're seeing, $50, $75 an acre losses on farms if we grow an average crop at the projected commodity prices. And that's improved slightly over the last couple of weeks because canola has been on a bit of a run. But that also means that we've seen nitrogen fertilizer has been on a bit of a run as well, wiping out some of that if you haven't locked in your fertilizer supply yet for the year. And so that starting point is a really, it doesn't feel very good to be staring down $550 break evens, and we can't make any money if we don't grow an above average crop. We need to grow a 110% of our normal crop or get 110% of our projected prices just to break even, let alone to generate some profit. And at the same time, we have to worry about downside risk with insurance. And every farm situation is going to be different to understand this. Each farm is different, but this is average. So there are people that are better than this. There are people that are above average and are, able to get to a break even. But the scary part is that, the average 50% of the farms are worse than what I'm showing here. That is potentially, a very bad starting point. We haven't seen this starting point since about 2007. 2008 was the last time we saw data that looked like this.
Dave, just to clarify, this is GAR's customers, that sheet you were looking at? That
would be all applicants across all years, yeah.
But all applicants. So arguably that would be skewed towards the better, higher end production farms, right?
So I guess it's definition of a farm.
Your average would be better. Your average would be better than the actual average out there, would be my estimation.
Our data shows that our farms are slightly larger, and our data shows that our farms are also slightly better performers, because the farmers that don't tend to apply, they're either too small, that makes them usually very inefficient, or their numbers aren't very good and they know it, so they don't apply. But that's, so this would, the actual Western Canadian the whole industry would probably be worse than what I just showed.
Yep.
And I think where it goes to is like understanding we're not going to get through this in 1 year. We've got to chew through this really large crop, from a supply side. But the bankers need to understand the only way through this is time. Farmers will react by controlling their expenses as best they can. But there's no point in putting somebody into special loans. The break even is the break even. We need to store this grain and get through from 1 year to the next and wait for some marketing opportunities to try and make some money with the grain that we will grow. But the farm is sitting in a situation where, for a lot of guys, selling their grain, off the combine to pay bills is going to set them up for a very bad year, unless we see a disaster somewhere around the world that moves commodity prices significantly up from where they are today.
So Mitchell McPherson had the question that I was thinking, because I was looking my chops. You had that top farms for 5 and 10 years tab, and I'm like, what's behind door number 2 and number 3 here? And I would love to see, those charts. What are those charts called, where you have the points of data and where they fit on the distribution curve, and then you have those like outliers that are way up and way below? I would love to know who's way up, who's the outlier, who's doing that much better, and how can we emulate that? Therein lies the path.
Yeah, and it is, if you want to be the top 25% of farms. So what you saw there, sneaky on the bottom of the screen. This is the top producers.
Yeah.
But I actually don't like the top producer. I like the top managers better. So top producer is just top revenue generators. Top manager is the most profitable farm. And they tend to be a lot of the same people, but not always.
Right.
Because
Dave, where do you do your cutoff profit? Do you before land building and finance?
so this is, oh, sorry, I got the wrong. This is gross margin. So this is the most, this group top managers is net income after all expenses, including land building and finance. And arguably you could remove land building and finance from contribution margin, and stop it there.
Yeah,
But what we do see is there are farms, plenty of farms, that their land building and finance is high, but they also are the lowest productivity producers. So their land building and finance is high because they're not generating good growth margins.
Yeah, but or it could be just that they're a new farm or expanding farm. That's why when we do
true. The crossover of this, there tends to be, when I look at the data sets, the Venn diagram of top producers and top managers is it's not a complete circle. There's a bit of a divergence, but there tends to be the top producers almost always fall into the top manager's profile, but not every time. When they don't, it tends to be because of LPM, not because of LBF.
And can you paint a specific picture of what that outlier looks like? Like that's killing it in the Venn diagram right in the center?
So the center of the dot is exceptionally high growth margin. So be in the top decrement of gross margins. You want to be in the top quartile, top decrement of gross margins for their area. And then they want to be sort of medium LPM. You can't be the lowest LPM because it's really hard to be efficient with a really low LPM. You got breakdowns and things getting in the way. And then LBF is just a function of wealth generally. I don't judge people for their land building and finance. It's a function of how much land you rent versus own, how much debt you carry, which is a function of past historical, did your parents gift you the land or did you have to buy it? All of those scenarios.
And that's why when we do our benchmarking, we benchmark exactly the way Dave talked about for the M&P benchmark. How we determine the best producers is before land building and finance. So if Jake's comparing himself to a farm that inherited all their land, or comparing himself to a neighbor that rents all their land, he takes that out of the equation and just says, how is she doing in crop production versus how he's doing in cost management of machinery and humans, and the net of those two is really the key factor, and Dave touched on that.
And so this is Southeast Saskatchewan that I'm showing here, just because it's relevant for a lot of people that are on the call based on where we're all from. This is gross margin. The gap between the bottom 25% and the top 25%, we're 142 versus a $400 in 2024. It's a massive gap in gross margin that's being generated from those operations. Farming in, essentially, that's a big area, but I know which side I want to be. And then when we look at inputs, when we look at seed, fertilizer, and chemical, the difference doesn't show up in seed, fert, and chem. The top 25% actually tend to spend slightly less than the average and slightly less than the bottom 25%. So as a percentage of their gross margin, the top 25% is generating more dollars of revenue from their net income from their inputs than the bottom 25%. And then, that's the other story. So that's the cumulative wealth that's being generated between the two operations, big divergence, but it's LPM. The most profitable farms, the top 25%, have a controlled LPM, and the bottom 25% tend to have an uncontrolled, very poor LPM, and it exacerbates. So you're not having great growth margins, and then you're not having great cost control. You end up with not very good net income. And then LBF is just a reflection of wealth. I think, though, this might be a reflection of management's ability to generate wealth when we take this through from the beginning to the end, is that lack of gross margin is showing up on LBF for this group of producers. It's not where you want to be, certainly.
Well, we're getting close to the top of the hour here. That flew by. Time it dilated, guys. That just incredibly fascinating. I saw Jake nodding his head there too. I want to get his thoughts on this, but yeah, Mitchell is asking, Is it a larger gross revenue or lesser costs that get them in the top percentage? Or are we seeing the large revenues brought with high input costs, but after the settles, ROI was there to spend the money and push hard? I mean, you touched on it, but
I think I touched on it. I think it's a combination of great agronomy and great execution combined with buying good product. But it's not, they're not buying less product. They're not buying more product. Everyone, it's their ability to take a pound of N and turn it into a bushel of grain. That is the generating that growth margin isn't about spending more on inputs. Generally, a lot of times with good agronomy, we can spend less on inputs if we're very careful with our approach.
I wonder if somebody invented a system whereby you could perform slightly better, like say 5% in every area. That could lead to,
Wouldn't that be interesting?
Speaking engagements and world tour.
So then we take that same information and we drill it down to the individual producer. So this is the sample farm that I put together.
You need some more spreadsheets, Dave. You don't have enough.
I love spreadsheets, but that spreadsheet, when you're talking about individual performance versus the area, we're then comparing the individual versus his region. We're looking for where's the gaps, and this farm performs very well. When we compare his cost structure, he's got slightly lower, slightly higher fixed costs because he's got slightly higher LPM and slightly higher LBF, slightly higher input spending, but he's got great gross margins. So this farm is kind of okay. Would he be better if he would be controlling his LPM a little more? Yep. If I'm looking at this farm, I might try to figure out how could we squeeze a little bit more out of this LPM, that 5% rule. I would start looking there. Maybe we can, do a little better on our input purchasing. We got $20 more inputs, but maybe that's just that extra pass of fungicide that's got a huge ROI.
Jake, you go ahead. I saw you were gonna chime in on Dave talking, because if you only talk when Dave's running out of spreadsheets, you would never talk.
You're a great moderator, Dean.
No, I've just been kind of watching these spreadsheets because I find them really interesting too. It's not really data that we have access to on our farms. So it is interesting to see. I find that with inputs, there are some farms that it's like, I saw enough grasshoppers to spray this quarter over here, so the whole farm's getting sprayed. And same thing, fungicides and same thing, So there is something to be said for doing the scouting or hiring somebody who can do it for you and saving that pass, or perhaps you can find a cheaper product, or there are a lot of ways you can edge that direct inputs cost down a bit. So I do find it quite interesting that it isn't always the guys who spend the most on inputs even that are generating the most revenue. And I would say that on our own farm, that's what we found. It isn't always spending that extra 10 or 20 bucks. Sometimes it's holding that back that actually really goes a long way to adding to the bottom line.
That's an excellent comment. And what I'd like to chime in to make sure, and Dave talked about it, so I'm not picking on the big man.
You can take it.
I can take it.
Yeah. I don't think my words are going to hurt Dave Sullivan's skin. But Dave talked about not liking the term fixed cost, and I want to echo that. There is no such thing as fixed cost, folks. Everyone says, well, I could farm 2,000 more acres with the same machinery, labor power machinery, and the same land building and finance. That's not true. Because if you take it to an extreme, if I farmed 1 million acres, I wouldn't do it with the same number of combines I farmed 700,000, right? So there's no such thing as fixed costs. So just make sure we don't use that terminology and don't assume that that's how they react as we expand our farms.
Yeah, and I think I'll share. A lot of people came on the podcast, or what are we calling it, Dan?
A live online farmer-oriented workshop for the good of mankind.
Okay,
that just flows off the tongue.
I just made it up.
Nope, I don't want.
You haven't even talked about some of the tools you got in the it's live online free producer workshop webinar session.
Yeah, we will jump to the GARS product that we promised we would talk about, and then we'll frame it with the crop insurance discussion.
Okay.
So the global ag risk product that everybody understands, we've got our fixed costs. That means we've got risk. That means we buy a global ag risk coverage for $150 worth of margin protection. And then we cover 100% of your variable costs, seed, fert, and chem, as you go through the year. As we're spending money, your coverage is going up. Just, this farm has $50 of risk through the year. We hope he has a good harvest. We hope he makes money. We don't have to pay a claim. Everybody wins. But if he has a poor harvest, our global ag risk product pays the difference on that accrual basis. And so global ag is going to pay the difference between our coverage and wherever their actual outcome was, the combination of yields, prices, quality, and what they spent on inputs. The new product that we call YieldPlus takes into account either an 80 or a 70% crop insurance claim across the farm. And you choose which one you want to buy. 80% crop insurance across the farm or 70% crop insurance across the farm. And we take that insurance claim and count it as revenue. Whereas all our other global ag risk products ignore crop insurance, this one counts it. And when we do that, the YieldPlus product will pay the difference. And so what that does is it means that the global ag claim will be smaller because you've got this crop insurance indemnity that's counting as revenue, but it's also counting when we do the underwriting. So what that means is we get a much, much lower price. So in Southwest Saskatchewan, Southeast Alberta, you would see, a 70% savings in premium from the traditional global ag risk product. For Southeast Saskatchewan, Northern Saskatchewan, Manitoba, you'll see, maybe 40 or 50% savings to your full coverage premium. So it's significant savings because we're getting that crop insurance claim as part of the calculation of in the event of a GARS claim. And it's essentially what it's doing is it's turning your crop insurance policy into a GARS policy by giving you the benefit of price and input coverage and margin protection. It's just including your crop insurance yield payouts as part of the math.
Dave, do you have a global podcast risk solution as well? A podcaster's risk solution? Could you have a chart of that? Oh.
It's not a podcast yet.
Not a podcast yet.
Okay,
and we still have all the other products that work with agri-stability, work with your traditional standalone product. Full coverage is still our most popular coverage. We have all the other options, which what we find as we go through years and years of doing this analysis is that most often the right answer is going to be a combination of products. It's going to be crop insurance plus agri-stability plus GARS. Maybe it's GARS plus agri-stability. Maybe it's GARS plus AGI3. Maybe it's AGI3 and agri-stability and no GARS. And that's okay. It's understanding your numbers and then understanding your insurance options. And when we do that, the way we approach the business is to make sure that we've got all of the information. I got another spreadsheet. Thank you, Dean. We input all of the farm's information, their quotes from all of the various, from us, from crop insurance, from any of our competitors. We input all of this. And then we start to throw scenarios at it where we try to understand for the farm, what's your cost of production? What's your gross margins by crop? What crops are making you money? Which ones aren't? We can look at different cropping options. So if you're thinking about changing out crops, as Jake said, if you're going to chase a market, you might choose to, explore a crop you haven't grown. Well, we can do some math to help understand how's that going to affect your bottom line. And then we do insurance options. So we load different options into the coverage calculator. We can go, no GARS, different levels of GARS, take the premium, assume crop insurance at different levels, and then we essentially start to throw different scenarios at it. Agri-stability, no agri-stability. We see this right now pretty often is that farmers are not looking at agri-stability because they don't like the program, how long it takes. But for a lot of farms, it's the most effective coverage because it's based on those prior 5 years where we've got that really high commodity prices for a couple of years in the average. And so when we look at these scenarios, what we need to understand is all of your options, your costs, your rotation, and we start to pull out what is going to work for your farm. And this is work we do. M&P does it. Evan Maverick, he does it. There's probably others. Terry Becker, his group at Baxswath, they do it. Lots of others out in the industry that do this work, but I think it's the extra hour of time this time of year to make this decision with an informed lens, I think is super important. And with the new YieldPlus product, what we're seeing because of the savings versus full GARS coverage, the premiums are much lower, but it allows for this combination. Although you're not going to get double paid from crop insurance and GARS, because you're only going to get a check from crop insurance in a yield only scenario where we have high prices but low yields. Crop insurance will pay and GARS wouldn't. Whereas in our traditional product, GARS would also pay. You'd end up getting.
But that's why I've always been a solid fan, no matter what additional bolt-ons you do. And I've been beaked in the industry for being biased towards this, and clearly I have no stake in Global Ag Risk Solutions, but I'm good enough at math to know I'm not very good at math. And the number of combinations and permutations you could design for your farm, the formula would be as big as the building that Jake's in, right? There's no way you could do that. So I always like to just buy concrete bottoms with some combination of ag stability and global ag risk, even if it's at a very low threshold or if it's this YieldPlus component. Now I've got a financial floor that is impenetrable, right?
Well, the other thing that we're obviously long on time here, but with the commodity prices that we have right now, we need to be taking advantage of this bump up in canola price. We need to be taking advantage of it. Jake, and you probably follow this closer than we do, but I'm guessing the recommendations are to be 20 or 30% sold for new crop on canola based on this most recent rally. What's the strategy to lock in some of this? These are decent prices. These are on the right side of the average right now for the futures market. The basis is not particularly attractive though.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The futures market is part of our insurance model on our farm. I mean, we can only use it for canola and some spring wheat that we put in. All the specialty crops, we don't get it. But at least on canola, that is something we can do to try to hedge some of our risk without having to go and make a bunch of commitments physically that, things happen. We don't know if we're going to be able to fulfill those. So I like what Dean said, though, about, trying to establish a concrete floor. Like you should understand the insurance that you have. If you don't understand how it's going to trigger and how you're going to get paid, then that makes it really difficult to know where you're at. And if it gets too complicated, sometimes that can be a problem too. So I think the good news is there's a lot of products out there right now. There's a couple different private companies. I would agree that acre stability is more effective risk management than it has been on our farm in the time that I've been on the farm. So there's a lot of ways you can put things together, and I don't think anybody should be afraid of asking for help in calculating some of this stuff, because it is quite complicated. There's lots of options to help guys figure this stuff out. So
I just wanted to stick a pin in it there. We are a little bit over time, but you know what? If you guys are open to it, this is a workshop. David, I don't know if you
stick around.
Yeah. But for everybody that joined and has to leave, thank you so much. I'm grateful for the incredible attendance. I think at one point we had 200 folks on the call here, and I think close to 300 are registered by now. So we're hopefully providing a lot of value for your very precious time.
Yeah, we can go through a couple of questions, I think.
Yeah, we should. And I wanted to ask the audience, though, too, what's your biggest takeaway? And I had some big ahas I want to share later. we don't want to go all day here, but we do want to get these questions. Neil Galbraith is asking, have you looked at doing YieldPlus using 90% crop insurance coverage available in Manitoba?
Yeah, so the CAT program in Saskatchewan, I can't remember what it's called in Manitoba, but it's essentially the CAT program in Saskatchewan is the same. The YieldPlus product right now is built CCP in Manitoba. Thank you. YieldPlus product right now is built for 70% and 80% crop insurance, where the assumption is that you bought 70% across all your crops, 80% across all your crops. For 2027, my goal is to be able to build out, the CCP program, the CAP program, or options where the farmer could choose, to buy 80% on his spring wheat and 80% on his canola and 70% on his lentils, and that would affect the rate properly. Right now, year one of the product, we needed to keep it simple, and so it's today based on either 70 or 80%.
And those 90% and those 90% options on crop insurance, and not picking on those folks, but it's a complex formula.
Yeah, I mean, you got to understand what you're buying there when you buy into that CCP or the CAP program with crop insurance, because it's the revenue calculation that is done to formulate a claim. I think it might be an interesting option though to layer in with Global Ag, but that'll be down the road.
But remember this, that most folks don't have the giant brain that big mug of Sullivan's holds. So if anyone doesn't want to get into the details and the weeds near as deep, there's still simple options that Global Ag and the folks at Ag Stability and Crop Insurance can combine. Because Jake said, if you don't understand how they react, they're not going to give you confidence when you go into the field. And that's really what we're trying to buy, is confidence in the field, folks.
And I think
do we have enough data that large brains are statistically superior just based on David Sullivan, Dean? Can we make that
lucky I got a
a spreadsheet for that? Your head is larger. Just kidding. Go ahead, David.
Well, and I think it's taken advantage, like Jake said, you got to be confident if you know what you have for your bottom line. And so what we're seeing in the math right now is that for some farms, agri stability is a great starting point. When for some farms, it's not, like depending on your past 5 years of history. So you need to have your accountant, or if you yourself can figure it out, but understand what your starting point on that agri stability program is, because that will change the frame of reference around how other programs are going to work. The other thing you need to understand is that agri stability program, and Dean, I'm going to throw you under the bus, but the accounting that prepare that program, because you end up, when you're in a claim, you're probably going to use your accounting firm to process your claim, and the time that it takes to get your money can be quite extended. Like will be quite extended. You need to be able to cash flow that program, and some farms can cash flow it waiting for their money, but other farms need to think about, well, what am I going to do for cash, in the fall or the winter when I'm really going to need it to make some payments, which is where other products can come in, like Global Ag or AGI3 or crop insurance. So agri stability alone might look good on a chart, but it doesn't always look good to your bank account while you wait for 12 or 18 months to get your money. And so I think we need to understand both sides of that equation of when is the cash going to arrive.
I think that's a really good point. Like when I'm working on our own insurance, I almost budget like half of agri stability coming in a time frame that's useful. Because when you plot it on a spreadsheet, it's like, oh, we're covered off really well. But your interim payment is only 50%, and who knows if it's right. It takes, it's almost like back to the days of the wheat board. It takes 18 months to get your agri stability check fully in your bank account. So, and then you might have to pay some of it back. So it's a bit unreliable. So it's worth looking at, and it's worth being part of the discussion, but I think you got to take a bit of a qualifier on it that it might not be as useful as you hope it will be.
Yeah, it's a bit of a black box. Because the exact amount you're going to get paid has got a lot of things that are not currently set. It's not as predictable as one would like. So that unpredictability means that it's a good starting point, but it's not as reliable. So then we want to layer in reliable coverage, and then everybody's global ag risk offer is different. So your global ag risk offer is based off of your historical performance and your next year's forecast. And it is farm by farm underwriting. So the offer of insurance is your offer of insurance. Sometimes we're able to offer, great coverage that's all the way to your break even. Sometimes there's a big gap between the offer that Global Ag is showing and what your break evens are. And that's farm by farm by farm. And it's, I'd love to be able to offer break even coverage for everybody, but we can't. But that's why you need to look at multiple options, because look at us, look at AGI3, look at crop insurance, and understand them all and understand where they all, kick in and trigger. What we're seeing in several farms, I'm going to bring up another spreadsheet. There's a bit of a trough.
Trigger finger here.
There's a bit of a trough of despair as we go through the year. We get this. Some of the worst case scenarios on the farm end up actually being. I'm going to move my screen so some of the worst scenarios on the farm actually end up being modest losses. Where is there it is. This one might look familiar, Dean. When we understand what the farm's situation is and applying everything against it, oftentimes the worst case scenario is, a small yield decline, not the big yield decline, because the big yield decline, we're going to get double paid. And so if we go no GARs, we'll go 70% crop insurance, we'll go no hail. And so what this graph is showing, the one on the bottom here, this is yield at 80% and declining. The crop insurance, is below the break even. Where we look at the other programs, when we combine it with, GARs and agri stability, this little trough in the middle here, this is the most pain we're feeling on this farm example, is that between 180% of their projected revenue, because crop insurance isn't kicking in, GARs isn't kicking in, and then agri stability, because of their coverage being high this year for this particular farm, it starts to kick in. And as their yields or revenue declines, we start to stack agri stability and global ag risk on top of each other, and we end up returning back to a break even. So a 70% crop is better than a 90% crop in a lot of scenarios when we combine agri stability with other programs.
So I'm going to chime in there. I'm going to chime in there because we can't unleash the beast because he's way over 99% of people's heads. Sully spent a significant portion of his life understanding these numbers. And so basically my recommendation, folks, is if you don't understand it as well as Dave Sullivan or Evan Shout or any one of those experts or some of the folks at M&P, then lean on them. And if you do understand it as well as them, it's still better just out of sheer laziness to go spend 2 hours with one of Sully's guys or gals or one of Evan's people or one of M&P's folks to have them run the scenarios. And if you do understand it perfectly, like let's say my buddy Derek Talon, he understands as much as Dave and I do. Just out of sheer laziness, you could sit down with those folks in 2 hours and have it move and change and react because they have the tools. So, and I'm not trying to make a sales pitch when I say that, but just get confidence on it, get an understanding about it to the level that you're comfortable with, and then march on and execute. Because we got a lot of crop it's a big undertaking to seed this province, take care of it during the summer, and then harvest it. I don't know if you can notice that, Jake. It's a fair bit of work.
Yeah, it tends to be. And I've spent a lot of spreadsheet time building in my own models for calculating this stuff, and I still like to get a second opinion just in case I've got a calculation wrong or something like that. It doesn't cost a lot to get a little peace of mind and make sure that the numbers you think you have are actually right. So I don't think there's anything wrong with getting a little bit of outside opinion on this stuff.
Quickly, Aaron Lambert's asking, with YieldPlus, do you need to have every acre insured with SCIC?
Well, no, technically we don't care what you do with SCIC, but I would highly recommend it. So if you choose that Yield Plus product, we're going to assume everything is with SCIC. We're going to do the math as if you are. That is, again, first year of the product. For this year, we're doing the math as if every acre is insured with SCIC. Future years, when we can get a little more customized, we'll be able to drop acres off and do the math right. But for this year, we're assuming that it would be. So to say that, if every acre is not with SCIC, but we assume it, you've got a coverage gap, and you have to understand that. And for some farms, they might be comfortable with that, but personally, I wouldn't recommend it. So I would say we would insure the farm based on, we might not, I wouldn't recommend that product in that instance if not every acre is going to be.
Start to look like the complexity. If you don't buy that, Dave, it starts to look like the complexity of a derivative instrument, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. We do have some weird cases where some forage or a silage crop, and we're able to exclude that from the farm's GARS policy and match it up to the crop acres. That would be the one instance that we can sort of split the two off. Would be some hayland or some silage that isn't part of their crop. It's really more of their livestock operation. We'll split that off and just insure the crop acres where, normally we might insure the whole thing. That would be the one instance, but that would be a case by case basis for sure. The other question that came up there was GARS quote dropped because P price dropped with the rally in canola and the wheat. Are we going to requote? The answer is yes. So we have to kind of run on the most current reality of commodity prices. So we're, last week green peas dropped like $3 a bushel. So we had to reset our quotes based on that reality until we see some signals that it's going to be stronger. But with canola and wheat and lentils being stronger, we get new price lists as often as we need to, but we'll get a new price list probably today, and we will requote a bunch of farms based on the most recent commodity price intelligence that we get. And we pay a third party to provide us with that intelligence. So it's not my best guess at commodity prices. I'm paying third parties to help us guess what the price will be next fall. It's not a futures price. It's an estimate of next fall's price.
But the takeaway from that, Dave, is if you're comfortable and you've made the decision you're going to take the GARS, then you better pull the trigger quick. How long do people have between when you send it and close?
Well, and this is based on the market reality that we live in. Back in the old days, we used to give guys 2 weeks, but we were living in this dreamland where commodity prices didn't move $3 a bushel in a single day because of geopolitics and tariffs. And so now the quote is the quote, and you essentially have until basically the end of the day. If overnight something happens and then in the morning I got to slam the door shut, I got to slam the door shut. So there is some risk when you receive a quote to sit on it and wait. If something happens in the meantime that dramatically impacts prices, we would need to react, and those quotes would no longer be valid, unfortunately. Okay. We did that last year with the Chinese tariffs, over the weekend, and we honored the quotes that were before the tariff that were in the hopper, but everything that came in the door after the Chinese tariffs got put on the weekend, we weren't able to honor, and that's we got to protect the capital of the reinsurers that back us. So it is an unfortunate reality of private insurance versus government insurance, is that we have to be concerned about profitability. But part of that is be ready to make your decision. So when you make that decision and you call the office and say, I want to buy, you're locked in, your insurance is locked in. As long as you've made that call before something weird happens. And unfortunately, we're living in a world where weird things are happening more frequently than they were maybe 5 years ago. So that decision-making process is get all of your information in front of you, get your quote, and if you like it, lock it down. we, right now with I'd say some strong canola numbers, lentils are up a bit, wheat's up a bit. We got some strong quotes out in the marketplace relative to traditional crop insurance because they set their prices back in January. And I'd say our quotes look pretty good. We're insuring 80, 85, 90. I think this week we'll be staring down, maybe up to, 90 some percent of farms' projected revenue based on these commodity prices that we're sitting in front of this week.
Dan, I got a hard stop coming up here in 5
Yep.
minutes. Is there any questions that you care for my comment on?
I actually need to jump off now here, so I'm
We
gonna
appreciate it.
Appreciate it, Jake.
let
We
you guys
appreciate it.
go. So
Thanks so much. Any big takeaway,
Yeah.
Jake? What's your big insight from today?
I'd really like to get a copy of David's spreadsheets. I think that would be
I'm on the other side of Jake on that, and as an advisor to young farms, don't spend 700 hours of your life trying to learn Sully's spreadsheets. Just go pay Evan Schauder or one of the GARS folks for 2 hours of their time. Not everyone's wired like Dave and Jake. So
and
I
just go grow
strongly
crop.
recommend.
Well, thanks so much for coming on, Dean and Jake. And I'm going to keep Dave on just to answer a few more questions and wrap it up. But for anybody who's leaving the call, biggest takeaway from Andy Keene, know your numbers. If you're not confident in certain fields, pay someone to help you, to your point, Dean. And confidence is gained in getting that info, and better decisions will be made, leading to better farm profits and sustainability. I love it. Thank you, Andy. We were chatting last night about it.
But I cut Jake off. I cut Jake off on the spreadsheet thing. He didn't get his. What's your summary, Jake?
Actually, I think Dan just said it. I think it's just know your numbers and know what your options are. I think that's the takeaway.
Awesome. Thanks, guys, for coming on. Just going to keep Dave for a couple more minutes, just to get a few more questions answered here. It is a workshop. And for everybody that joined but has to leave now, thank you so much. I appreciate your attendance.
Appreciate Jake. Thanks, Dean.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
So Cole McMahon is asking, how does GARS treat futures first contracts for fall? Without basis locked in, there is obviously a risk there still, but it's the best option at this time for new crop sales with basis levels widening.
Yeah, I don't really like that basis right now either. So if it's a delivery contract, we actually include it in your math. So you tell us that you've got, 10,000 bushels, 20,000 bushels locked in a futures market. We're gonna include that math in our calculation for next year. You're de-risking the insurer because that price is locked in for a portion of your production. Obviously, you've got a floating basis. So as long as it's a delivery contract, we're going to include it. If you're buying the futures just on, with a trade account, we don't include anything that's going on in the trade account because the trade account has too many ins and outs and what's new crop, what's old crop, there's a lot of sort of to unwind that is nearly impossible. So we've made the choice years ago to leave trade accounts alone. Those are not part of anything that we consider. We don't consider in the underwriting. We don't consider it in the claim. But yeah, that futures contract with the delivery option for it, which you're going to lock in your basis in a future month, we would include that as part of our math. If it's, it's de-risking us, and if it's at a better price than what we're using for our prices, it's going to improve your quote slightly based on the net effect it has on your operation. So and that really goes down. It's farm by farm underwriting. So all of your marketing that you've done so far, that's included in your underwriting. All of your inputs that you've locked in. If you've already locked in your fertilizer, then great, tell us that. That's included because for us, there's risk in that Iran snaps the war starts and fertilizer prices start to jump. Well, anybody that has unpriced fertilizer is now riskier to the insurer because inputs are part of our calculation. So letting us know that you're 100% bought or near 100% bought. That last couple truckloads is not of real concern, but if the majority of your purchasing is done, that's great. Tell us. Farm by farm underwriting.
I'm wondering, as you're talking, how best that these high performers could integrate these different disciplines. If you're good at knowing your numbers, if you're good at marketing, if you're good at production, I mean, it comes down to getting the experts together, probably.
Well, and I think so. And part of it is even understanding like how the policies all work together. So like global ag, 2021 was a year where we saw huge yield declines, but then we also had big buybacks because farmers were locked in, 50% of their production, and they thought, well, they're obviously going to be able to grow 50% of my plan, so I'll lock that in. And then they ended up growing 20% of their plan, and they had non-delivery on 30% of their plan, so that they had to buy back those bushels because the prices shot up in the fall. That's all part of the GARS claim calculation. So the GARS customers will market a bit more aggressively. So instead of going to 30% sold, they might go to 50 or 60% sold even before seeding, because they know that if they have a bad year, non-delivery, and they end up with a penalty, that penalty is part of their claim calculation. Now, it's also, if it's a good decision and you sell your grain for more, that's also part of your claim calculation. And it might reduce your claim because you marketed your way out of a problem, which is good. The smaller or the bigger, if you don't get a claim from global ag, that means you made more money. If you did a good enough job marketing that you're not in a claim, great, good for you. Good for us as well, good for the insurance company. But first and foremost, good for you. And so because we're participating in that marketing with the farmer, we want them to market when there's opportunities. Like right now, I think canola, we'd want to lock in that, some maybe the futures price, but maybe leave that basis for now. That's a great decision. When we're going to see some weather rallies in the spring, as people start to get nervous, the buyers start to get nervous, we'll lock in some of those weather rallies in June and July, and we ride with you through that. Global ag gets to, does that. The other products out in the marketplace don't.
Well, I think it all comes down to relationships. If you can find a relationship with someone in the industry who has a exceedingly large head with a big brain and lots of spreadsheets, like our good friend David Sullivan at GARS. But there's lots of wonderful people at GARS. It's truly an incredible tribe, and I get to attend your conference and see the wonderful family atmosphere you guys have on the team, and not just spreadsheets, I guess, proficiency, but there's a blanket fort building a proficiency there late at night. I noticed as well, so it's great survival skill. It's another story, but. And Mark had made some really great comments here about, hey, we can work your numbers. We can take you through all the options. Best to contact an advisor, head office. I put their contact into the chat. I mean, this is just an exhibition, I guess, of what's possible. I'm honestly grateful that there's these tools in farming, because this is a great business tool that at least one should investigate thoroughly at the minimum.
Yeah, and I think, I wanted to come on, obviously spent a lot of time talking about understanding your numbers, building your business plan, working through it, benchmarking yourself versus others. I think that is, for me, the most important thing. The global ag risk stuff, which is how I get paid, it's the paycheck every 2 weeks. But the crux of it is, once you know your numbers and understand it, understanding your insurance options becomes much more black and white, way less opaque. You can see how the programs work together. You can see how sometimes they double pay, and you'll understand the levers that you can pull, because the goal is to not be in a claim, and the goal is to have the best insurance option for your farm. It's not one size fits all. Every farm business is different, and I think with this year, the YieldPlus option that we've come out with, and it's the version 1.0 of it, is a fit for a lot of farms. But it's interesting enough that a farm that maybe visited global ag years ago and said, it's not for me, it's too expensive, or I'm never going to leave my crop insurance, so I'm not going to spend the money on a global ag policy. Well, now we've got an option that fits for you, and it opens some of those doors back up for us. And this year, with the starting point that we have with these commodity prices that we've got today, it's like we can't afford to get even worse. So we can layer in some insurance options to protect that downside risk, almost like a put option for your farm.
Mm.
You know, if we compare it versus some grain marketing, but having that put option on your farm to know that it can't get worse than this, you can farm with confidence, but also then take advantage of opportunities when they come along on the commodity price side. Maybe it's on the input buying side. We need to be, you know, this year's you got to have a sharper pencil than usual. You know, we always have to have a sharp pencil in Canada, but this year it's, you know, never been more apparent that you got to be, you know, at the top of your game.
The put option analogy is awesome. And my big takeaway, Dave, after watching all your spreadsheets and listening to the conversation today is, you know, this Pareto principle is for real and it is accelerating. Gap's going to widen. It's just, it's a natural accumulation. And where are you going to be on that distribution chart and how are you going to get there? And I think a lot of it is relationships with experts. When I hear somebody like Evan Shout talking on the farm advisory panel for Eberhard Farms, you know, I heard him on Zoom when I was in Arizona at my dad's place talking. I'm just like, wow, that sort of acumen, positioning, support, you know, directionality, like simplifying it, all the things that you're talking about. Get yourself an expert like that and get yourself on the high end of the distribution curve. We want that. And I think everybody that's on this call has took a good step. I think that's a great place to wrap it up. There's a lot of different rabbit holes we can go down, but thank you, David Sullivan, for sharing your wisdom. And thank you to Global Agri Solutions for making this possible. And we're going to do more fun stuff, cool stuff, sharing deep, deep knowledge, I think, in the mastermind we were talking about. I'm really excited about that. And that's almost just a giving back. That's just, you want, like you said at the beginning, you want people to be able to understand this vernacular so they can improve their operations for the betterment of Western Canada and to get those farms succeeding down into our children's hands and their children's hands. Is survivability, like keeping the farm going is a big thing here.
Yeah, I agree fully. And I mean, I want this stuff to be just the way it's done, because I know how powerful it is. I know how it affected my farm and my parents' farm. I know how much impact it's had on businesses that we touch every day at Global Ag. You know, Dean and our experience with Dean, and you get to work with farms like Jake that have been using these tools, and you can see the impact. It's, you know, it's the rising tide, which is fun to be a part of, and I just want it to be, you know, available to everyone.
Yeah. Well, I just want you to work on a product for podcasters. I need a global podcast revenue, guarantee my revenue.
Sounds risky,
as well.
Pretty expensive premiums.
Try and make a living online these days, you know.
Yeah.
Stuart McMahon says, thank you guys. It's been awesome. Whatever these are called, please keep it up. We don't know what they're called, but yeah, we don't want to call them webinars and podcasts. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. Thanks, David. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Afton, for making this possible. Thanks, Scars. You guys are doing a great job. All the advisors out there, and talk to your advisor. Get figured out. Find out where you're at if you don't know. And we'll be doing more of these in the future, I'm sure, David. So thank you.
Good stuff. Cheers.
Take care. Bye for now, everybody.